Chapter 12. Room of Requirement. No, I got the perfect way to kill Voldemort. It had been a week since Sephiroth had threatened Dumbledore and the Turks had handled Ron and Hermione. The school had turned into complete chaos with Umbridge running around now interviewing all the teachers, and it always seemed to be during their class. But thankfully even though Ron and Hermione couldn't remember who tortured them, if you could honestly call that torture with how fast they cracked, steered clear of their group. The Harry side of Sephiroth felt a small pang at the loss of his only two friends from the wizarding world, but the strong personality of Sephiroth couldn't care less. Ron was a ticking time bomb. He turned too easily on his so-called friend and allowed his jealousy to rule his emotions and thoughts. He was jealous of the fact that Sephiroth was soldier. The boy didn't even know half the shit that he went through to get to that point. Hermione. Well, while she was good for some things, she was actually very immature in the long run. She always felt the need to prove her superior intelligence. It was honestly like working alongside Scarlet once more, just not quite as retarded. The group was all currently sitting in the Great Hall eating breakfast. Sephiroth could feel Dumbledore's gaze boring into him from the head table, but he ignored it in favor of watching Angel's puppy bouncing on the bench. What, Zach? He didn't think he wanted to know, to be brutally honest. You guys remember those magic urns Professor Creepy made when I was a third? Angel and Sephiroth both pulled a face, their eyes going wary as they looked at the puppy. Oh yes, they remembered those horrible creatures. A horrible monster that spent its life in a bright orange jar with swirly eyes painted all along it, the only thing of the monster you saw with its bald purple head and alien yellow eyes and a glowing thing at the end of an antenna at the top of its head. It had been created as a game between the scientist. Yes, it would seem Hojo had a sense of humor, that it was a giant midget roulette as you had to pick an eye, and if you picked the right one you would win something. Get it wrong and the monster would one-hit even Sephiroth. We find one of those and say we have Potter, tell him he's inside and the only way to get him out is to hit the eye. Boom. Voldemort gets killed by Potter. Why? Everyone at the table groaned at the horrible pun. Zach was groaned out by several of the members as the girls were giggling like hell behind their hands. Even Reno was laughing with his head on the table. Zach pouted, laying his head on the table. I thought it was a clever idea. He mumbled, giving them all his best kicked puppy look. You would you? Reno lifted his head back up, shaking it, and glanced over to his lover, who he could see was also shaking his head. I really have to wonder what those Mako shots did to all of your heads. You are all psychopaths. Need to be to work for a Shinra. Rude shot back, earning him several snorts and everyone looking away as Rufus gave them all death glares. Don't make me sick, Dean, on you lot. He grumbled, going back to his breakfast. So what class you all got now, yo? Reno asked the group of fifth years that actually had to go to class. He and Zach had a free period right now. Potions. Angel groaned. Even as Angel, he hated potions class. Snape, despite the fact Neville had turned into a walking behemoth, was still picking on him because he still sucked at potions. Chemistry in school was never Angel's strong point, why he would stick with plants, so Snape took any and all opportunity to harass him. Angel's honor and pride was getting in the way of him telling the old bat off, and he wouldn't allow any of them to tell Snape off for him. Nope, the man would just suck it up and ask Sephiroth for assistance. Having grown up in the lab, Sephiroth naturally upon waking up fully had become the best in the class, his analytical mind picking up on things quickly. Tseng, being who he was already a master at mixing poisons together, so potions became second nature. Rufus had thankfully retained some of Draco's skills in potions, so he fared pretty well. Even though Sephiroth had quickly become the top of the class, Snape still felt the need to push his buttons, though after the threat in Dumbledore's office he wasn't as inclined to push said buttons after seeing the 7-foot sword. But it was hard to forget that this wasn't Potter anymore, and it was wearing on Sephiroth's last nerves. How the hell could Snape not realize he wasn't Harry anymore? Picking up a golden goblet, Harry examined himself in the reflection. His hair was even more silver now, though for some reason was remaining stubbornly wild instead of growing out like the others had. His eyes were now constantly the green-silver glow as the Mako was back to full strength in his body. "Tseng, did you two ever find a room?" Sephiroth asked. They needed to find weapons and start training once more. He would need to find a replacement for Masamune until he built his strength up enough that he could once more wield his beloved Nodaki. "We did." Tseng dropped his voice, knowing even in the loud hall he would still be heard by the enhanced Turks and soldier. "7th floor, we found it completely by accident." Reno started pacing in front of a wall trying to figure out where to go, and a door appeared in the wall. "The house elves. Dobby, I believe his name is, told us it was called the Room of Requirements when he heard us talking in the kitchen. It gives the user exactly what they need." Reno nodded, leaning in slightly. "We went back and tried it out. It actually recreated the Shinra soldier gym perfectly." A smile lit all their features. While the Turks generally trained down in the Batcave, as Sephiroth so lovingly called it, they would occasionally come up and use the massive soldier gym on the second plate. "Did you try and make the VR room?" Angel asked. Honestly, that was one of his favorite places to train, and he missed Panora horribly. "Tried that, yo, no go. But I contacted Vincent and they have some of the VR cameras. It would take me a bit, yo, but I could transfigure a control panel and wires and wire up one of the dungeon rooms to become a VR room. You know, no one goes down there beside the Slytherins and Snape. Start working on that. That will be your mission. After classes, let's meet up on the 7th floor and we'll head in for some training." "We should be going. Snape just left the table, and you know what will happen if we are late." Tseng rolled his eyes, grabbing his bag, and stood up. He could not wait until this summer when he would ditch out of Hogwarts forever. They all had agreed that they would gain as much intel during this year, and that was it. Most of them could not handle being treated like ignorant children anymore. He sure as hell couldn't. If Umbridge talked down to him one more time, he honestly didn't know if he could keep his Turk mask in place. Standing up, Sephiroth sent the others a wary look. Oh, they were all quite familiar with the famous Utai fireball. It was a common joke that had actually led to him being pants once by a cadet, that Tseng was a redhead dyeing his hair black. President Edgar Shinra was terrified of Tseng when he was angry. It had only happened a few times when he had said or done something really stupid that Tseng had lost his cool. But those times Shinra would give the man whatever he wanted just to make sure that anger wasn't directed at him anymore. Tseng had actually managed to wrangle out a 2-week fully paid vacation for his Turks in one of those PMS bitch modes, as Genesis so lovingly called them, which meant that a few of them got to play Turk for 2 weeks. Oh, it was fun. Trust him, it was fun. But Sephiroth never wanted to be a Turk full-time. There was so much bullshit the Turks put up with, and cleaning up after Soldier, it wasn't even funny. Picking up his own book bag, Sephiroth headed off down to potions, knowing Angel was right behind him and Rufus would show up whenever Rufus felt like showing up. Passing by Ron and Hermione, he slid a glance towards them, seeing them watching him with a glare along with half the rest of his fellow classmates. "What?" he snapped, narrowing his own acid eyes into a glare. Ron stood up, his ears dark red as he glared at his one-time friend. "I'll tell you what's wrong. You are what's bloody well wrong. You've turned into some cold, heartless bastard that believes you are better than us all." Sephiroth growled low and moved in close. Seeing Ron backing up, he had to be quick since McGonagall was approaching their table, and swiftly. "Cut to the jealousy bullshit, Ron. You want to prove yourself that you are just as good as I am and can be a soldier. Common room after class is over. We'll see if you are really cracked up for this. Pulling away, he moved away from the table before McGonagall got up to them. Seth, are you sure that is a good idea? He's unenhanced, he won't stand a chance against you. Don't forget, old friend, it was an unenhanced infantryman that ended my life. The group all sat at the very back of potions class, the 4 reincarnates taking up one of the tables. I should have known. Angel grumbled, seeing Umbridge walking around the front of the class, her clipboard in hand, scribbling notes, probably about the horrible decor of the room. If it wasn't pink and meowing at you, it was ugly. Well, this just made class that much more interesting. Tseng mumbled, lying his head down on the table, though made sure not to lay down in a suspicious-looking stain. That it has. Snape might have been an asshole, but out of the two he would prefer to see Snape chew into Umbridge compared to the other way around. Fluttering into the class as he normally did, Snape took one look at Umbridge, a sneer playing on the edges of his thin lips. Turning away from her, he quickly wrote down a very base potion on the chalkboard. Madame Pomfrey has asked that we resupply her pepper-up potions supply as there has been a rash case of wizarding mumps. You will brew this potion. I believe even Longbottom can handle this. Angel flushed some at once, more being singled out, but said nothing, allowing Sephiroth to be the one to get their ingredients. Moving back to the storage closet, Sephiroth started to grab the supplies for himself and Tseng, who stood behind him. If that man makes one more crack about my father, I'm going to let him meet my father. He knew at some point today Snape was going to make a crack that he is just like his father or some other bullshit like that. This time, Snape would regret those words, cause he would make sure he met the undead ex-Turk. Think further, can let one of his demons come out to play. Maybe Galleon would like to come out and gnaw on his leg just like Fluffy did. Fluffy? Tseng had a single brow raised as he took the ingredients from Sephiroth and headed back over to the table. Yeah. Sephiroth sat back down, laying everything out for Angel to cut. It was amazing. The man was one of the best cooks he knew, but he couldn't make a proper potion. Fluffy was what Hagrid named his 3-headed dog that was guarding the Sorcerer's Stone back in our first year. Rufus shook his head. Leave it to that man to name a dangerous animal, Fluffy. Better than Dark Nation. Hojo about had a hissy fit when he found out what you named your guard hound. Sephiroth smirked, starting the potion. He had been down in the labs that day and Hojo about had a coronary. Oh, it was so sweet. It had taken all of Sephiroth's self-control to not start laughing right in the middle of the lab. Good. I should have named more of his guard hounds something similar. Maybe we would have been rid of him sooner. Rufus smirked wickedly, stirring the potion the required amount of times. He honestly couldn't hold a knife to save his hide, which was why he carried a shotgun around. Trust me, if I was not in a contract with Shinra, I would have ended his miserable existence a very long time ago. My first human would have been him, not some mutai rebel. Sephiroth shook his head but looked up, hearing Umbridge starting to speak in that squeaky voice of hers. Professor Snape, how long have you been working for Hogwarts? Snape looked very uncomfortable as Umbridge seemed to be batting her eyes at him. Tseng. Burn my eyes out, please. Sephiroth turned his head away. Sometimes he really hated having a perfect photographic memory. Imagination cause what his mind just conjured up scared him for life. It scared him worse than the thought of Hojo getting it up long enough to produce an offspring. Laughing softly, Tseng rubbed Sephiroth's back as he laid his head on the table and started to beat his head into it. Angel chuckled softly, rubbing his head as the poor general moaned in pain, and not physical pain either. Please. I need brain bleach. I cannot unimagine what I imagined. It says here that you applied for the position of Dark Arts Professor? Yes. And you were unsuccessful? Sephiroth and the group all looked behind them, as that is where Snape had migrated during her questioning, as he still kept watch of his students. This was kind of a question. Clearly. Sephiroth couldn't help it, just the tone of voice it was said in and the way he barely moved his lips just sent him into a quiet giggle fit. He wasn't the only one. Angel and Tseng were also laughing softly. Umbridge made a noise before turning and leaving the room. Snape looked down at the giggling boys and proceeded to smack all three on the back of the head with the folder he was holding. This instantly set all three off and they died on the table. They were laughing so hard. Okay, I have to admit that was one of the better potions class we ever had. It sounds like that would have been fun as hell. You wish we could have been there. The groups of Gryffindors were heading onto the 7th floor, begrudgingly, with both Ron and Hermione following behind them. It seemed like Ron couldn't go anywhere without his brain behind him. He would prefer to wipe the mats with just Ron there, but maybe this might make them both wake up and finally just leave him the fuck alone. Reaching the 7th floor, it was easy to spot Tseng and Rufus waiting for them, and thank the goddess. Genesis. Smiling brightly, Sephiroth broke away from the group and rushed up, leaping up into his lover's arms. He couldn't help it, he did still have some of Harry in him, and Harry would have done this. Laughing, Genesis caught his lover kissing him deeply. Missed you too, Seph, ready to get your ass handed to you? The world needs a new hero. Sephiroth stepped back and scoffed, a small smile tilting his lips. Come and try. So smug. But for how long? They both grinned, easily remember the lines that had led to that fateful battle, which was the trigger for Genesis' degradation. Whereas Cloud and Father. Sephiroth watched as Tseng paced in front of the wall, causing a door to appear in it. Cloud had to go back to the states he had in order that needed to be completed by tomorrow, and Vincent is back monitoring the cameras. So it's just little old me today. Smirking, the group moved into the room. Instantly all their eyes lit up as they looked around. It was exactly like how they remembered it. Thick blue mats covered the floor with dark red and green thicker padded mats stationed all around the room. A small set of bleachers as against the far wall with the symbol for soldier painted on the wall next to a Shinra sign. Above them were hundreds of balance beams and obstacles that were used primarily by the second and first classes. Against the far wall was a huge weapons rack filled with Buster Jr. swords. Laughing loudly, Zack charged into the room and leapt up onto one of the thicker landing mats and spread out on it. Oh, it even smells like the old gym. Audra, cadet. Genesis smirked, getting a laugh from the others. That's exactly what it smells like in here. Throwing his bag on the bleachers, Sephiroth pulled off his robes, revealing a workout outfit he had transfigured for today. Sephiroth. Once you have warmed up, meet me out on the mats. I want to see where you are at muscle-wise. Sephiroth nodded and started to stretch out. Thankfully Ron and Hermione had stayed up on the bleachers and weren't coming anywhere near him. Rufus was sat up by them since he wasn't a fighter. Make sure to take notes, Weasley. Watch what my men do and tell me if you have what it takes to be soldier. Tell me if you watch them that they do not deserve the titles they have been given. Ron scowled down at Rufus but was smart enough not to say anything as Rude was sitting not that far away. Instead he turned his eyes back on Sephiroth. He really only came here because he wanted to prove to them that this whole talk of being reincarnated was a bunch of bullshit and maybe they could get their Harry back.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed the videos so far and video game content. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment down below. And I noticed 40% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. It'll help me and help the channel grow. Until next time, goodbye!